My cousin Brian makes $95,000 a year. He's got a degree from a good university, works for a reputable company, drives a decent car, lives in a nice neighborhood. By every traditional measure, Brian is solidly middle class, maybe even upper middle class, depending on where you draw the line. Last month, I asked him how he was doing financially. You know what he said? "Man, I feel broke all the time." And here's the thing that should terrify you. Brian has more purchasing power than his dad had at the same age. His dad made the equivalent of about $68,000 in today's dollars, doing the same type of work. Brian makes 40% more, and yet his dad felt financially secure, bought a house at 28, took the family on vacation every summer, and retired comfortably. Brian, meanwhile, has $8,000 in his savings account, $42,000 in student loans, rents a 2-bedroom apartment, and genuinely believes he'll never be able to retire. Same job, more money, completely different psychological reality. My name is RP, and I spend way too much time thinking about why people who are objectively doing okay financially feel like they're drowning. If you're someone who makes decent money but constantly feels behind, like you're one emergency away from disaster, or like you'll never actually get ahead no matter how hard you work, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because what I'm about to show you is going to fundamentally change how you think about your finances. We're not talking about whether you can afford your bills. We're talking about something way more insidious. We're talking about how the middle class has essentially adopted the psychological patterns of poverty, even while maintaining middle-class incomes. And the brutal part? Most of it is completely invisible until someone points it out. Here's the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. Being middle class used to mean something completely different than it means today. In 1970, if you were middle class, you had certain assumptions about your life that were just givens. You assumed you'd own a home. You assumed you could support a family on one income if you wanted to. You assumed your kids could go to college without taking on devastating debt. You assumed you'd retire with a pension. Those weren't aspirations, they were expectations. Fast forward to today, and every single one of those things has become either impossible or requires such an extreme level of financial optimization that it dominates your entire mental landscape. And here's what most people don't realize. When those fundamental assumptions change, it doesn't just affect your bank account, it completely rewires your psychology around money. There's this concept in psychology called scarcity mindset, and it was originally studied in people living in poverty. Researchers at Princeton found that when people are operating under financial scarcity, it literally reduces their cognitive bandwidth. Here's how they measured it. They gave people a series of cognitive tests. Then they gave them a scenario involving an unexpected $1,500 car repair. For wealthy people, this had no impact on their test scores. For poor people, their IQ scores dropped by an average of 13 points just from thinking about the financial stress. 13 points. That's the difference between average and gifted, or average and borderline learning disability. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When they replicated these studies more recently, they found that middle-class people are increasingly showing the same cognitive patterns as the poverty group. A 2023 study from the University of Michigan found that middle-class Americans, defined as households earning between $50,000 and $150,000, reported the same levels of financial anxiety and the same scarcity-based decision-making patterns as households earning under $35,000 did in 1995. Think about that. The middle class of today is psychologically functioning like the poor of 30 years ago, even though they're making more money. Let me show you why this is happening, because when you actually break down the numbers, it's shocking. Let's take a hypothetical middle-class person in 1985 versus today. We'll call them Mark and Maya. Mark, in 1985, salary $35,000, equivalent to about $95,000 today. Average home price in his area, $75,000, equivalent to about $204,000 today. Home price to income ratio, 2.1x. College tuition for his kid per year, $1,200, equivalent to about $3,200 today. Healthcare costs, family plan, annual, $1,500, equivalent to about $4,100 today. Maya 2024, salary, $95,000. Average home price in her area, $425,000. Home price to income ratio, 4.5x. College tuition for her kid per year, $28,000. Healthcare costs, family plan, annual, $18,400. Do you see what's happening here? Maya is making the inflation-adjusted equivalent of what Mark made, but housing costs have doubled relative to income, college costs have increased by 775%, and healthcare costs have more than quadrupled. And this is just the big three. Let's not even talk about childcare, which has increased by 214% above inflation since 1990. Maya isn't bad with money. The game has fundamentally changed. But here's where it gets really dark. It's not just that things cost more, it's that the constant financial pressure creates a perpetual state of stress that mimics poverty psychology even when you're not technically poor. There's research from the American Psychological Association showing that 72% of Americans report feeling stressed about money at least some of the time. But when you break it down by income bracket, you find something shocking. People making $75,000 to $100,000 report only marginally less financial stress than people making $35,000 to $50,000. That should not be the case. Someone making $90,000 should feel dramatically more secure than someone making $40,000. But they don't. Why? Because they're both operating in scarcity mode. They're both constantly doing mental calculations about trade-offs. They're both one major expense away from feeling like everything falls apart. And then you layer on top of this the absolute mind virus of social comparison, and it gets even worse. My friend Jessica makes $87,000 a year as a marketing manager. She should feel good about that, right? It's well above the median household income, but instead she feels like she's falling behind. Why? Because she's constantly comparing herself to people who appear to be doing better. Her college roommate just bought a house. Jessica doesn't know that her roommate got a $100,000 inheritance from her grandmother. Her coworker drives a Tesla. Jessica doesn't know he's $65,000 in debt from that car and other purchases. There's this fascinating study from Harvard where they asked people if they'd rather make $50,000 while everyone else makes $25,000 or make $100,000 while everyone else makes $200,000. Most people chose the first option. They'd rather make less money in absolute terms, as long as they're making more relative to others. Let that sink in. We'd rather be objectively worse off financially as long as we feel relatively better off. And here's the problem. In the age of Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn humble brags, everyone is constantly being exposed to people who appear to be doing better. Your brain is getting flooded with signals that you're falling behind, even when you're objectively doing fine. Now let's talk about debt, because this is where the psychology gets really twisted. The average middle-class household in America carries about $145,000 in debt. That includes mortgages, car loans, student loans, credit cards, all of it. But here's what's different from previous generations. That debt used to be primarily mortgage debt that was building equity in an appreciating asset. Today, a huge chunk of it is student loan debt and car debt that's depreciating or not building any asset at all. According to the Federal Reserve, the average student loan debt for borrowers is now $37,000. That's money spent on education that, sure, might increase your earning potential, but it's also a monthly payment that restricts your options for years or decades. And here's the psychological impact. When you're carrying that kind of debt load, you can't think long term. You can't take risks. You can't make the kinds of strategic career moves that might pay off in 5 years because you need to make your loan payment next month. You're forced into short-term thinking, which is exactly the same psychological pattern that keeps people in poverty. Let me hit you with a statistic that should genuinely scare you. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, 45% of working-age households have absolutely nothing saved for retirement, zero. And of those that do have something saved, the median retirement account balance for people aged 55 to 64 is $120,000. You know what that buys you? About $500 a month in retirement income if you follow the 4% rule. Can you retire on $500 a month plus Social Security? I mean, technically yes, but you'll be living in poverty. And here's the thing, these aren't poor people. These are middle-class people who fully intended to save for retirement, but just couldn't. The money wasn't there. Between the student loans and the housing costs and the healthcare expenses and the childcare and everything else, there was nothing left over. So now you have millions of middle-class people approaching retirement age who are realizing they'll probably need to work until they die or face a dramatic decrease in their standard of living. And when you're 35 or 45 and look at those numbers and realize you're probably in the same boat, how does that make you feel about your financial future? It creates this sense of hopelessness that is psychologically indistinguishable from poverty. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but people are also spending more money on stuff they don't need. Bigger houses, nicer cars, more subscriptions. And you're not wrong, there's definitely an element of lifestyle inflation happening. But here's what most people don't realize. Lifestyle inflation is actually a psychological response to scarcity, not abundance. When you feel like you're working incredibly hard and still falling behind, your brain seeks compensation. It wants proof that your efforts matter. So you buy things that signal success, even if you can't really afford them. There's research showing that people who feel economically insecure are actually more likely to make luxury purchases than people who feel economically secure, because the luxury purchase provides a temporary psychological relief from the feeling of scarcity. It's the same reason people in poverty sometimes spend money on lottery tickets. It's not that they're stupid, it's that the psychological burden of scarcity creates a need for hope, even if that hope is irrational. And here's the most insidious part of all of this. The middle class is trapped in what I call the invisible cage. You make too much money to qualify for any assistance programs. You don't get subsidized healthcare, subsidized housing, subsidized childcare, nothing. But you don't make enough to actually feel secure. So you're stuck in this weird middle zone where you're expected to handle everything yourself, but the math doesn't actually work. And because you're middle class, society tells you that you should be doing fine. So when you're struggling, you feel like it's your fault. You must be bad with money. You must not be working hard enough. You must be making bad choices. But the reality is that the system has fundamentally shifted, and what used to be achievable through normal middle-class income now requires either extraordinary income, extraordinary frugality, or some combination of both. Alright, so what do we actually do about this? Because I'm not just here to depress you with statistics, I want to give you actual strategies. Strategy number 1, reject comparison. This is the most important one. You need to ruthlessly eliminate comparison from your financial life. Stop following people on social media who make you feel behind. Unfollow the lifestyle influencers. Unfollow the finance gurus showing off their investment portfolios. Unfollow anyone whose content makes you feel like you're failing. Your only comparison should be to yourself last year. That's it. Strategy number 2, optimize the big 3. You can't cut your way to wealth by eliminating lattes, but you can dramatically improve your financial situation by optimizing housing, transportation, and food. If you're spending more than 30% of your gross income on housing, you need to seriously consider moving, getting a roommate, or finding ways to increase your income. I know that's uncomfortable, but the math matters more than the comfort. If you're spending more than 15% of your income on car payments and insurance, you're driving too much car. Sell it. Buy something cheaper. I don't care if it's not as nice. If you're spending more than 10% of your income eating out and on food delivery, you're hemorrhaging money in a way that will keep you in the scarcity cycle forever. Number 3, build a screw you fund. Before you invest, before you pay extra on your mortgage, before you do anything else, build a cash emergency fund of at least $10,000. Why? Because the psychological shift from having zero buffer to having $10,000 in the bank is massive. That buffer is what allows you to think long term instead of constantly being in crisis mode. A study from the Urban Institute found that people with $5,000 in liquid savings report dramatically less financial stress than people with $1,000 in savings, even if their incomes are identical. The buffer changes your psychology. Number 4, ruthlessly question every subscription and recurring expense. I know I sound like a broken record on this one, but subscription services are specifically designed to keep you in the scarcity trap. They're small enough that you don't notice them, but large enough that they add up to thousands of dollars a year. The average American spends $273 per month on subscriptions. That's $3,276 a year. If you cut that in half and invested the difference, over 20 years at 7% returns, you'd have an extra $68,000 in retirement savings. Strategy number 5, increase your income. Look, I know just make more money sounds like terrible advice, but the reality is that for most people, there's more potential to increase income than there is to decrease expenses. You need to either negotiate a raise at your current job, switch to a higher paying job, or develop a side income stream. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're making $65,000 and you increase that to $80,000 over the next 3 years through strategic job moves and negotiations, you've just changed your entire financial trajectory in a way that clipping coupons never will. Here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. The middle class is facing a psychological crisis that's just as real as a financial crisis. You're not crazy for feeling broke even though you make decent money. You're not bad with money just because you can't seem to get ahead. The game has changed and the old rules don't work anymore. But here's the thing. Once you understand what's actually happening, once you see the psychological patterns and the structural changes that created them, you can start making different choices. You can reject the comparison trap. You can optimize the big expenses. You can build a buffer. You can focus on income growth. You can stop spending money to compensate for feeling behind. None of this is magic. It's just awareness plus intentional action. The middle class isn't doomed to become the new poor, but it does require you to operate differently than your parents did. It requires more financial literacy, more intentionality, more optimization. And honestly, it requires you to care less about what everyone else is doing and more about what actually works for your specific situation. If this helped you out, make sure to subscribe because I make videos like this every week, breaking down the financial and psychological patterns that are keeping people stuck. And if you're feeling this middle-class squeeze, drop a comment and let me know your experience. I read every single one. All right, I'll see you in the next one.